Hello friends behind Thai Story, friends dreaming of retiring in Thailand, sipping cold mango smoothies on golden beaches, or strolling through night markets under the neon glow. Tonight, I need you to lean in. Because what I'm about to tell you is not a love story, it's a brutal warning. Hendery thought he had finally found his second chance at life. A man in his late 50s, gray at the temples but still carrying the quiet dignity of a businessman, he arrived in Thailand with hope in his heart. He wasn't chasing nightlife, he wasn't chasing bar girls. He was chasing peace. But paradise has shadows. This, friends, is the story of how a man's expat dream turned into a nightmare. Of how Thailand's beauty can hide dangerous traps. And before we dive deeper, let me tell you this: don't skip, because what you hear tonight could save your future. Subscribe, hit that bell, and stay with me until the end, because the truth of Hendery and Phailin's love story is darker, sharper, and far more devastating than anything you could imagine. Before Thailand, there was silence. Hendery lived in a small apartment on the outskirts of Rotterdam, in the Netherlands. 58 years old, a bachelor who once had a fiancée but never made it to the altar. His days were marked by routine: coffee at 7, a quiet walk to his modest office where he managed imports and exports of electronic parts, and late evenings with nothing but the hum of his refrigerator and the flicker of his television for company. To his neighbors, he was the polite man who nodded but rarely lingered for conversation. To his colleagues, he was dependable, steady, but perhaps a little too serious. And to himself, Hendery was simply surviving. Years earlier, his life had promised more. He had fallen in love with a woman named Marianne in his early 30s. They dreamed of marriage, of children, of buying a small house with a garden. But Marianne's sudden illness and passing left him shattered. He never fully recovered. Dating after her death felt empty, like trying to repaint a canvas already covered in grief. By his late 40s, Hendery stopped trying. He poured himself into his work, growing his small business with discipline but little joy. He was financially stable, but emotionally bankrupt. The walls of his apartment felt smaller each year. Birthdays came and went without celebration. And as colleagues retired or moved on, Hendery remained, aging quietly, unnoticed. Loneliness became his shadow. In 2020, when the world shut down, Hendery's isolation deepened. He watched as friends his age posted pictures of grandchildren, family dinners, anniversaries. He had no one to call, no one to check if he was all right. And it was then that the thought began to take root: is this all my life will ever be? By the time he turned 57, the idea of escape felt less like fantasy and more like survival. He wanted out of the gray skies of the Netherlands, the endless drizzle, the silence of an empty flat. He wanted warmth, both in climate and in human connection. Thailand appeared like a beacon. He had visited once in his 40s, on a business trip, and remembered the sensory overload: the aroma of sizzling pad thai from street stalls, the gold-tipped temples gleaming in the sun, the laughter of children splashing in the Chao Phraya River. The memory never left him. He thought, if I cannot find life in the Netherlands, perhaps I can find it there. Retirement articles painted Thailand as paradise. Affordable living, vibrant culture, and, above all, companionship. Countless expats wrote online about finding love with women who valued loyalty and care. The thought intoxicated him. Perhaps here, thousands of miles away, he could reinvent himself. But it wasn't only hope that drove him, it was fear. Fear of dying alone. Fear of never being touched, never being loved again. Fear that the next 20 years of his life would look exactly like the last 20, empty and silent. So Hendery made his decision. He sold his business to a younger partner, cashed out his savings, and boarded a plane bound for Bangkok. With him, he carried 2 suitcases and a fragile dream that Thailand might give him what Europe could not: a new beginning. He pictured mornings walking through markets with someone by his side. He imagined laughter over iced coffee on hot afternoons. He fantasized about companionship, about not having to face life's small and large moments alone. But here's the truth, friends: this very dream, so tender, so human, was the perfect bait for predators. Scammers don't just target wallets, they target hearts. They search for men like Hendery, stable, kind, but aching for connection. And Hendery, he didn't just wear his vulnerability, he radiated it. He told himself he was cautious. He had read warnings online about bar girls and quick marriages. He promised he would avoid those traps. He wanted a good woman, someone educated, someone outside the nightlife scene. He believed that by setting those rules, he could protect himself. But rules mean nothing when loneliness is louder. By the time Hendery landed in Chiang Mai, the weight of his solitude had already carved deep cracks in his defenses. All it would take was the right smile, the right gentle touch, the right story to make him believe. And believe he did. Because within weeks of his arrival, amid lanterns and street parades, fate, or rather, manipulation disguised as fate, introduced him to Phailin. And with that single collision, Hendery stepped from one kind of loneliness into a far darker kind of trap. The first thing Hendery noticed when he stepped off the plane in Bangkok was the air, thick, humid, and alive. Unlike the crisp, sterile air of the Netherlands, Thailand's atmosphere was heavy with spice and exhaust, laughter and chaos. It was overwhelming, but in a way that made him feel, for the first time in years, awake. Taxis honked, tuk-tuks zipped by, and vendors along the roadside fanned smoke from sizzling skewers of chicken and pork. The air smelled of lemongrass and fish sauce, diesel and incense. The colors were brighter here, the reds deeper, the golds almost blinding, the sky an endless blue stretching above palm trees and temple roofs. For Hendery, it was intoxicating. He had rented a modest apartment in Chiang Mai, far from the notorious nightlife of Pattaya and Bangkok. This was intentional. He wanted authenticity, culture, and maybe, if he was lucky, a chance at companionship that wasn't tangled in bars and neon lights. Chiang Mai seemed safer, more peaceful. Mountains rising in the distance, monks in orange robes walking barefoot along the streets at dawn. Every morning, he strolled through the markets. He loved the chatter of vendors bargaining, the rows of mangoes stacked neatly in pyramids, the soft crackle of fried bananas being pulled from oil. Locals smiled at him when he tried his broken Thai phrases. For the first time in decades, he felt seen. At night, he wandered the old city. Lanterns floated in the moat that circled ancient walls. Tourists snapped photos, monks chanted from temples, and the scent of jasmine drifted from small gardens tucked behind gates. He thought, "This is where I was meant to be." Loneliness, for a brief moment, loosened its grip. He joined an expat group that met weekly at a cafe. Most were retired men like him, gray-haired, divorced or widowed, seeking a new chapter. They shared stories of cheap rent, friendly locals, and adventures on motorbikes. They spoke like Thailand was salvation, a cure for Western loneliness. Hendery listened, hopeful but cautious. He didn't tell them about Marianne, or the years of emptiness. But he thought, quietly, maybe I can heal here, too. Still, even in paradise, shadows whispered. One man in the expat group warned him, "Don't trust too quickly. Thailand's beauty hides dangerous traps. Some of these women, they see us not as partners but as paychecks." The man's eyes had a bitterness Hendery didn't understand, yet. He nodded politely, but inside he thought, that won't happen to me. I'm careful. The truth. He wasn't. Because while Hendery was cautious of bargirls leaning over neon-lit counters in Bangkok, he never imagined danger might wear the smile of a good girl at a street festival. He never imagined the trap wouldn't look like temptation, but like tenderness. In those first weeks, he walked through Chiang Mai with wide-eyed wonder. He visited Doi Suthep Temple, climbing the long staircase lined with golden Naga serpents. The city stretched out below him, rooftops glinting in the sun. He lit incense, bowed, and prayed quietly, not to Buddha, but to the universe, "Let me not be alone anymore." He ate bowls of cow soy, rich curry noodles with crispy toppings, slurping as sweat dripped from his forehead in the heat. He rode in tuk-tuks, gripping the seat as drivers darted through traffic with reckless confidence. He bought souvenirs he didn't need, simply because the sellers smiled warmly at him. And yet, for all the joy, he couldn't ignore the ache at night. He would return to his apartment, sit on the balcony overlooking the quiet street, and watch couples walk by hand in hand. The city was alive with love, with connection, and Hendery was still alone. That emptiness is what made him vulnerable. Because when the festival arrived, with fireworks exploding in the humid night, music blaring, and lanterns rising into the sky, Hendery wasn't just another tourist. He was a man praying, whether he admitted it or not, for something or someone to fill the void. And then it happened. The collision. A paper cup of iced coffee spilling across a white blouse. Apologies exchanged, laughter breaking the awkwardness. A woman with almond eyes and a shy smile. Phailin. She seemed different. Not a bar girl. Not someone chasing foreigners in clubs. Just a woman caught in an accident, grateful for his kindness. She brushed her hair behind her ear and looked at him like no one had in years. For Hendery, that look was everything. He didn't know it then, but Thailand's promise of paradise had just introduced him to its most dangerous trap, love too good to be true. Because under the fireworks and the laughter, while lanterns drifted into the sky, a new story began, one that would not end with healing, but with heartbreak. It started with a stain. A splash of iced coffee across a crisp white blouse, fireworks crackling in the night sky, and Hendery fumbling with apologies in broken Thai. He insisted on paying for the damage, but Phailin, slim, graceful, with hair that shimmered under the neon lanterns, waved it off with a shy laugh. Still, Hendery was insistent. "Please, let me replace it," he said, and with gentle persistence, he led her toward a nearby clothing shop tucked between street vendors. They stepped inside, away from the noise, and for the first time, Hendery looked at her properly. She couldn't have been older than 30, maybe 28. Her voice was soft, her English lightly accented but clear enough. She chose a modest blouse, nothing flashy, and when he paid, she pressed her palms together in a Y, bowing her head. "Kop kun ka," she whispered. "Thank you." That was the beginning. They walked back into the crowd together, and Hendery, emboldened by the moment, asked if she would join him for dinner sometime. To his surprise, she agreed. "Not tonight," she said with a smile, "but maybe tomorrow?" Tomorrow became the start of a whirlwind. At dinner the next night, Phailin told him about her life. She said she was working part-time at a bookstore while studying business administration. Her father had passed away, and she was helping support her younger sister, who was still in school. She spoke with humility, laughing when Hendery tried to pronounce Thai dishes correctly. She wasn't glamorous like the women he had been warned about. She wore simple clothes, no heavy makeup, no gold jewelry. She sipped her iced tea slowly, asked him questions about his life, and listened intently. When Hendery mentioned he had once been engaged but lost his fiancée to illness, her eyes softened. She reached across the table, touching his hand. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice almost breaking. It felt genuine. It felt real. And that, fellow travelers, is the danger. Because scammers don't always look like villains. They don't appear in smoky bars, dripping with jewelry and false promises. Sometimes they look like innocence itself. Sometimes they are crafted to be exactly what you're searching for. Within weeks, Hendery and Phailin were inseparable. They strolled through Chiang Mai's night bazaars, sampled street food side by side, and visited temples where she showed him how to light incense and bow correctly. She laughed at his clumsy attempts, holding his arm as if she was proud to teach him. The loneliness that had haunted Hendery for decades began to dissolve. For the first time since Marianne, he felt chosen, desired, alive. Of course, there were red flags. She rarely invited him to her home, always suggesting they meet in cafes or at his apartment. When he offered to drive her somewhere, she often declined, saying her family lived far outside the city. Once, she received a phone call during dinner, speaking rapidly in Thai before hanging up abruptly and smiling as if nothing happened. But Hendery ignored these cracks. Because the euphoria of being wanted was louder. She sent him good morning texts every day. "Did you sleep well?" She reminded him to drink water in the heat. She told him, "You are special. Not like other foreigners. You are kind." That phrase, "not like other foreigners," sank deep into Hendery's heart. It made him feel chosen, different, worthy. He didn't realize she probably said the same words to others before him. And so the honeymoon phase consumed him. They took weekend trips together, motorbike rides through green hills, visits to hidden waterfalls, lazy afternoons in small cafes where she introduced him to coconut desserts. She posted pictures with him on her social media, carefully framed, with captions about "my special friend." He never noticed that the comments were suspiciously few, or that she never tagged him. To Hendery, it all felt like destiny. One night, as lanterns floated into the dark sky during Ipang Festival, Phailin leaned against him, whispering, "I think maybe I was meant to meet you." Hendery's chest tightened. He believed it. Friends, this is where manipulation takes root. Not in the demands for money, not in the elaborate lies, but in the weaving of intimacy. Scammers know the currency of love isn't cash, it's trust. And Phailin was slowly, carefully, earning every drop of Hendery's trust. He told himself he was cautious, that he wouldn't fall for tricks. But when Phailin laughed at his jokes, when she held his hand in public, when she introduced him as someone important in her life, how could he resist? He was a man starved for connection. And Phailin, she was offering him a feast. By the third month, Hendery wasn't just falling, he had already fallen. He thought he was in love. He thought he was finally free from the ghost of Marianne, free from the silence of his Rotterdam apartment. What he didn't know was that every smile, every gentle touch, every whispered, "I love you," was part of a carefully rehearsed script. Because soon, very soon, the first request would come. Small, innocent, impossible to refuse. And with it, the opening of a door that would lead Hendery straight into betrayal. Love, when it begins, is a series of small rituals. A cup of coffee shared in the morning. A gentle hand reaching for yours in a crowded street. A whispered, "good night," over the phone. For Hendery, these rituals became the heartbeat of his new life in Thailand. Phailin had woven herself into his daily existence with startling precision. She messaged him before sunrise, "Did you sleep well? Don't forget to eat breakfast." She sent photos of herself studying, captioned, "I want to be successful for us." In every interaction, she painted a picture of a future that included him. The intimacy felt natural, but it was anything but accidental. One evening, Phailin invited Hendery to meet her family. He had been waiting for this moment, a sign of legitimacy. They took a taxi out of the city, down winding roads lined with rice paddies, until they reached a small house painted in fading blue. Her mother greeted him warmly, pressing his hands in a Y, while her sister, a teenage girl in a school uniform, giggled shyly. They shared a simple dinner: grilled fish, sticky rice, papaya salad. Hendery was moved. This wasn't a bar girl dragging him into a smoky nightclub. This was a family, humble and real. After dinner, Phailin's mother clasped Hendery's hand and said in broken English, "Good man. Take care, my daughter." Tears welled in Hendery's eyes. For years he had longed not just for a partner, but for belonging. That night, he believed he had found it. What he didn't know was that scammers often stage these meetings. Sometimes the family is real, but in on the scheme. Other times, they're friends or even paid actors. To Hendery, it was convincing. To Phailin, it was a performance designed to disarm him completely. And it worked. After that night, Hendery began to lower his guard. He opened up about his life back in the Netherlands, his failed engagement, his lonely years, his struggles during the pandemic. He told her things he hadn't told anyone in decades. And when he spoke, Phailin listened with eyes that shimmered with what looked like compassion. She leaned close, whispering her own secrets. She told him she worried about her sister's education, about her mother's health. She confessed she felt insecure. "Sometimes I think I am not good enough for you," she said, her voice trembling. Hendery rushed to reassure her. "You are more than enough, Phailin. You're everything I ever wanted." That's how manipulation works, not through grand lies, but through carefully chosen vulnerabilities. By pretending to bare her soul, Phailin made Hendery feel safe baring his. By making herself appear fragile, she triggered his instinct to protect. Soon, he began introducing her to his expat friends. Some were skeptical. One man muttered, "Be careful, mate. Too good to be true." But when Hendery looked at Phalin's shy smile, when she clung to his arm like he was her anchor, he brushed off their warnings. "You don't know her like I do," he insisted. And that was exactly the point. Within weeks, Phailin began using new words: our future, our home, our life together. She spoke of wanting to build something permanent. She teased him about marriage, saying, "Maybe one day, if you still love me." For Hendery, it was intoxicating. After decades of loneliness, here was a woman who not only loved him but also dreamed with him. He began to imagine it vividly: a small house in the Thai countryside, waking up to the sound of roosters, sharing morning tea with Phailin by his side. He had no idea these dreams were seeds she planted deliberately, so when the time came to ask for more, money, property, commitment, he would already see it as their dream, not just hers. The intimacy felt so genuine, so tender, that Hendery stopped noticing inconsistencies. He didn't question why her mother never answered the phone when he called, or why her sister always seemed to be conveniently at school when he dropped by. He ignored the fact that she rarely stayed overnight, always claiming she had to return home to care for her family. Instead, he saw what he wanted to see: a woman who loved him, a family that welcomed him, a future that seemed finally within reach. And so, with his heart wide open and his defenses crumbling, Hendery stepped further into the trap. Because soon, the intimacy would be tested. Soon, Phailin would lean on his love not just for emotional comfort, but for financial rescue. And Hendery, blinded by hope, would say yes. It came on a rainy afternoon. Hendery and Phailin were sitting at a cafe near the Phay Gate, watching the streets blur under the sudden monsoon. Hendery was sipping hot tea, content, while Phailin scrolled nervously on her phone. She seemed distracted, her fingers tapping rapidly, her lips pressed tight. "Is everything all right?" Hendery asked. She hesitated. He had learned that when Phailin hesitated, it meant something was weighing on her. She shook her head. "It's nothing. Don't worry." But Hendery pressed. And finally, with a sigh, she confessed. Her younger sister had fallen ill. A fever that wouldn't go down. The local clinic wanted payment for medicine, but her mother didn't have enough cash. She twisted her fingers in her lap as she spoke, eyes downcast. "I feel so helpless," she whispered. "I should be able to take care of my family. But right now, I cannot." For Hendery, the request wasn't even spoken aloud. It was implied in her tears, in her trembling voice. He reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "How much?" Her eyes widened. "No, no. I didn't tell you because I want money. I just—" "How much, Phailin?" he repeated firmly. She bit her lip. Then softly, "About 2,000 baht. For medicine. It's not much. I can pay you back when I get my salary." 2,000 baht. Barely $60. For Hendery, it was nothing. For a man with a lifetime of savings, it was less than a nice dinner. Without thinking, he opened his wallet and pressed the bills into her hand. Her reaction was everything he needed to see. Tears welled in her eyes as she shook her head. "You are too kind," she whispered. "I don't deserve you." She kissed his hand, holding it to her cheek. "I promise I will give it back. You are not just my boyfriend, you are my angel." And right there, friends, the line was crossed. Not because of the money itself, it was small, almost laughable. But because Hendery had now become more than a companion. He had become a provider. In psychology, this is called the foot-in-the-door technique. Scammers know that once you agree to a small request, you are far more likely to agree to bigger ones later. It builds a pattern of compliance. It creates a sense of obligation. And it makes the victim feel needed, an intoxicating role for someone who has been lonely for decades. Hendery walked out of that cafe feeling proud. Proud that he could help. Proud that he could ease Phailin's burden. He told himself, "This is what love is. We take care of each other." And for weeks afterward, Phailin reinforced that belief. She cooked for him more often, brought him little gifts, sent affectionate texts. "You are my hero. I don't know what I'd do without you." It felt like love, but it was training. Conditioning. Preparing him for the next ask. The requests that followed were subtle. A few hundred baht for her sister's school books. A small loan to help pay a utility bill when her mother's income was late. Always framed as temporary, always paired with promises to repay. And each time Hendery waved it off. "Don't worry about it," he said. "It's nothing." But in Phailin's script, it was everything. Every small request was a rehearsal for the performance to come. Looking back, Hendery would remember one particular moment that should have been a red flag. They were in the night market, browsing clothes and trinkets. Phailin admired a delicate silver bracelet, but put it back quickly. "Too expensive," she said. "I can't waste money." Hendery, eager to please, bought it for her. She smiled, but behind her eyes, he thought he caught a flicker of calculation. Just a flash, but enough to haunt him later. At the time, he brushed it aside. He wanted to believe he was spoiling her out of love, not being tested like a mark. Friends, this is how it begins. Not with grand theft, Not with bold demands. With whispers. With trembling voices. With a sick sister and a bill too small to question. And for Hendery, who had built a life around control and discipline, love had suddenly rewritten the rules. He wasn't calculating. He wasn't cautious. He was giving, and in giving, he felt alive. But what he couldn't see was that he was now on a slippery slope. One that would slide from $60 to $600 to $60,000. And once you start down that path, it's nearly impossible to stop. Because love, or what feels like love, has a way of blinding even the sharpest eyes. By the 4th month, Hendery's wallet had become a quiet extension of his love. Small requests no longer felt like burdens, they felt like proof of devotion. And each time Phailin pressed her palms together, whispering, "Kop kun ka, you save me," Hendery's chest swelled with pride. But scammers are patient. They know how to wait. It began with a story. One evening, as they walked along the Ping River, Phailin sighed and stared into the water. "Sometimes," she said softly, "I worry about my family's future. My mother is getting older. My sister will need money for university. I wish I could do more." Hendery squeezed her hand. "You're already doing so much." She shook her head. "Not enough. But maybe if I had my own cafe, we could be secure. People always want coffee, always want dessert. I dream of a small shop. Nothing big, just something stable." The idea lodged itself in Hendery's mind. A cafe. It wasn't wild. It wasn't unreasonable. And when Phailin described it, chalkboard menus, fragrant Thai tea, a corner where he could sit and read, it sounded less like her dream and more like their dream. At first, he only nodded. But weeks later, the dream returned. "I found a space," she said one night, scrolling through photos on her phone. "It's perfect. Small rent, good location. But I can't do it alone." She hesitated, looking down. "I don't want to ask. But if you believed in me, maybe we could build it together." There it was. Not a demand, but an invitation. Not charity, but partnership. Hendery's heart raced. After years of solitude, the idea of building something with someone, of being needed not just as a lover but as a partner, was intoxicating. He told himself it wasn't a handout. It was an investment. So when she showed him the figures, a down payment for equipment, initial rent, licenses, he nodded. 150,000 baht, roughly $4,200. For a man with retirement savings, it wasn't catastrophic. For love, for a future, it was almost nothing. He wired the money. And in return, Phailin kissed him like he was her savior. But no cafe ever opened. There was always a delay, paperwork issues, a landlord who changed his mind, a supplier who backed out. Each excuse was wrapped in apologies and tears. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I didn't want to disappoint you." And each time, Hendery reassured her. "It's not your fault. We'll figure it out." But friends, that's the genius of the scam. Once money leaves your hands, sunk cost bias sets in. The more Hendery gave, the harder it became to admit he'd been duped. He told himself, "It's just a setback. We've already come this far. If I stop now, everything we've done will be wasted." So when the next request came, he didn't resist. This time it was land. "In Thailand," Phailin explained, "foreigners cannot own property in their own name. But if you love me, if we are together, you can buy it under mine. Then we can build a house, a future." She spoke with conviction, painting pictures of mornings in their garden, dinners with her family, grandchildren running across the yard. She didn't just sell him property, she sold him belonging. Hendery hesitated. The amount was larger this time, nearly 1,000,000 baht. But Phailin's eyes brimmed with tears. "I don't want money," she whispered. "I want us. But we need a foundation. Please. Don't you believe in us? How do you argue with that? How do you say no to someone who makes you feel like their entire world?" Hendery transferred the funds. And for a while, everything seemed perfect. Phailin was radiant, affectionate, endlessly grateful. She paraded him before friends, calling him her future husband. They toasted to their future, clinking glasses of wine in dimly lit restaurants. But behind the curtain, the cracks widened. Documents for the property never appeared. Whenever Hendery asked, she smiled, changed the subject, or reassured him with vague promises. Thai law is slow. Don't worry, love. His expat friends raised eyebrows. You're sure about this? One asked. Careful. Many guys lose everything like that. But Hendery shut them out. To doubt Phailin felt like betraying her, and betraying the dream he desperately needed to believe in. Because deep down, Hendery wasn't just investing in land or a cafe. He was investing in the one thing he'd been missing for decades: hope. And hope, when weaponized, is the sharpest blade of all. He didn't realize it yet, but Phailin had transformed him from a cautious retiree into a man dangling over a financial cliff. And all it would take was one more push, another request, framed as love, to send him plunging into ruin. In the early months, Hendery admired Phailin's simplicity. She wore modest blouses, carried a worn handbag, and always insisted she wasn't that kind of girl. But once the money began to flow, something shifted. Slowly, subtly at first, then all at once. New clothes appeared in her wardrobe, sleek dresses, designer labels Hendery hadn't noticed before. A new phone gleamed in her hand, replacing the older model she once complained about. When he asked, she laughed it off. It was on sale. Don't worry. But Hendery noticed the bills grew, too. Dinner dates that once took place in humble noodle shops were replaced with upscale restaurants overlooking the city skyline. Coffee runs became weekend getaways. We deserve it, Phailin told him, slipping her hand into his. You work so hard. I just want us to enjoy life. And Hendery agreed. Why not? After all, hadn't he spent years denying himself joy? Wasn't this the life he had dreamed of, walking beside a woman who adored him, living freely in a place that felt like paradise? What he didn't see was how quickly the boundaries blurred. When Phailin's birthday arrived, she hinted at a gold necklace she had admired in a shop window. Hendery bought it without question. When her family needed new furniture, he covered the cost. She began suggesting little luxuries, spa days, boutique shopping trips, fine wine instead of beer. And Hendery, desperate to please, opened his wallet every time. But it wasn't only material things Phailin demanded. It was commitment. She began to speak more openly about marriage. My mother asks me, when will we marry? She worries. She wants to see me settled. She brushed her hair behind her ear, looking shy, but her words were sharp enough to cut. Do you want me forever, Hendery? The question sent shivers through him. He hadn't thought about marriage in decades, not since Marianne. But with Phailin, it seemed possible again. He pictured a ceremony under lanterns, vows whispered in the glow of candlelight. He told himself this wasn't just infatuation. This was destiny. But marriage, in her version, always came with strings. She reminded him of dowries, of traditions, of the home they needed to secure before making vows. Each conversation about love folded neatly into a conversation about money. And while Hendery hesitated at times, the weight of her affection crushed his doubts. She had a way of turning resistance into guilt. One evening, when he balked at another expense, she grew quiet. Her eyes filled with tears. Maybe you don't believe in us, she whispered. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe you are like the others, here for fun, not forever. The thought horrified him. No, Phailin. That's not true. Then prove it, she said, her voice trembling. Show me we have a future. Don't let me feel ashamed in front of my family. And just like that, the guilt melted his resistance. It was during this stage that Hendery began to lose connection with his expat friends. They had started warning him more directly. Mate, she's bleeding you dry, one said. I've seen this before. They hook you, they take everything, then they vanish. Hendery bristled. You don't know her, he snapped. She's not like that. And that's the cruelest part of manipulation. It doesn't just bind you to the scammer, it isolates you from those who might save you. Hendery began spending all his time with Phailin, avoiding the coffee meetups, ignoring messages from skeptical friends. She was his world, and he was hers, or so he thought. Phailin fed this isolation. She whispered in his ear, Your friends are jealous. They don't want to see you happy. Only you and I understand each other. It was intoxicating. Dangerous. By the 7th month, Hendery was living in a fantasy. He was convinced he had found not only love but purpose. He wasn't just an aging bachelor anymore. He was a provider, a partner, a future husband. What he couldn't see was that every meal, every necklace, every whispered promise of marriage was carefully orchestrated. Phailin wasn't just draining his savings. She was reshaping his identity. And once a scammer controls how you see yourself, friends, they don't need chains. You'll stay willingly. Hendery was deeper than ever. And yet, cracks were beginning to form. He noticed phone calls she declined, conversations she cut short, evenings she suddenly had to leave early. A seed of doubt tried to sprout in his chest. But before he could face it, she pulled him back with the sweetest words he'd ever heard. "You are the only one who understands me. The only one I trust. Don't ever leave me." How could he? Every love story, real or fabricated, has a rhythm. In the beginning, it's a symphony, every note swelling with harmony, every moment a crescendo of joy. But for Hendery and Phailin, the music had begun to change. Slowly at first, then louder, until even Hendery could hear the discord. It began with small things. Phailin, once quick to answer his texts, started replying hours later. When Hendery asked where she had been, she smiled too sweetly. "Busy at the shop," she would say. Except, the cafe project had never materialized. There was no shop. She grew distracted during their dinners, eyes darting to her phone, fingers dancing across the screen under the table. Once, when Hendery asked who she was messaging, she gave a quick, defensive laugh. "My cousin. Don't be jealous." Jealousy. It wasn't a word Hendery associated with himself. For decades, he had been alone. There was no one to be jealous of. But with Phailin, something darker crept in, suspicion. The turning point came one night when Hendery offered to drive her home. For months, she had always declined. "Too far," she'd say. "My family doesn't want to trouble you." But this time, he insisted. After some hesitation, she agreed. They rode in silence through the winding streets until they reached a small neighborhood. She told him to stop at the corner. "I can walk from here," she said quickly. "But why?" "I can drive you to the door." "No, no," she insisted, her smile brittle. "It's fine." She kissed his cheek, slipped out of the car, and hurried down the alley. Hendery watched her disappear into the shadows, his chest tightening. Why wouldn't she let him see where she lived? Why, after nearly a year, did so much of her life remain a mystery? That night, alone in his apartment, Hendery's mind raced. He remembered the warnings from his expat friends. Be careful. Too good to be true. He thought of the money he had already spent, the promises that had never materialized. For the first time, he asked himself, what if they were right? But almost as soon as the thought arose, he buried it. Because if they were right, if Phailin was not the woman he believed her to be, then what did that make him? A fool. A desperate old man clinging to a fantasy. And Hendery could not bear that truth. So when Phailin returned the next morning, all smiles and kisses, he let himself believe again. He let her laughter drown out the doubts. He let her promises stitch over the cracks. Yet the cracks only widened. She became moodier, quicker to anger. Small disagreements escalated into cold silences. If he hesitated before agreeing to a request, her face hardened. "Maybe you don't love me like you say," she accused. When Hendery tried to confide in her about his worries, about money, about the future, she turned it back on him. "You don't trust me. After everything, you still think I'm like those other women." The guilt was unbearable. He had always prided himself on being kind, on being loyal. To doubt her felt cruel. So once again, he swallowed his doubts, smoothed them over with reassurances, and dug himself deeper. But fate has a way of forcing truths into the open. One evening, while waiting for Phailin at a cafe, Hendery saw her across the street. She wasn't alone. She walked arm in arm with another foreigner, tall, sunburned, laughing at something she whispered in his ear. The sight punched the air from Hendery's lungs. For several minutes, he couldn't move. He wanted to believe his eyes deceived him. But when she later arrived at their meeting, breathless and smiling, with no mention of the man, he knew. Somewhere deep inside, he knew. Yet he said nothing. because to speak would shatter the illusion completely. And Hendery wasn't ready, not yet. Friends, that's the cruelest truth about scams like this. It's not just that the victim is deceived. It's that the victim often deceives himself. He chooses not to see, not to ask, because the lie is sweeter than the truth. And so Hendery stayed. He stayed through the lies, through the silences, through the nights she didn't come home. He told himself it was stress, family obligations, cultural misunderstandings. Anything but betrayal. But betrayal doesn't stay hidden forever. And soon, the mask would slip entirely. And when it did, Hendery's paradise would collapse into hell. Betrayal doesn't come like a thunderclap. It seeps in like water through cracks, slow, invisible, until suddenly the walls collapse. For Hendery, the collapse came one humid night in Chiang Mai, when illusion finally shattered into cold, merciless truth. It began with a phone call. Hendery was in his apartment, sipping tea, when her phone, left carelessly on the counter while she showered, lit up. A message preview appeared in English. "Miss you, babe. Same time tomorrow." His stomach dropped. Hands trembling, he picked up the phone. More messages filled the screen, sweet nothings, photos of Phailin smiling in restaurants he'd never visited, texts arranging meetings and promises of love. Different men. Different names. Different foreigners who thought, like him, that they were her only one. The room spun. His chest tightened. For months he had silenced the warnings, drowned out the doubts. But now, in plain pixels glowing on her phone, was the truth he had feared most. He wasn't special. He wasn't chosen. He was one of many. When Phailin stepped out of the bathroom, towel wrapped around her hair, she saw him holding the phone. For the first time, her mask slipped. Her eyes hardened. Cold. "What are you doing?" she snapped, snatching it from his hands. Hendery's voice cracked. "Who are they, Phailin? Who are these men?" She turned away, drying her hair as if his question were nothing but noise. "Just friends. You don't understand. Friends." His voice rose, trembling with rage and desperation. "Friends don't send messages like that. Friends don't tell you they love you." She whirled around, eyes blazing. "And what if they do? You think you own me because you give me money? You think you're the only one?" The words struck like knives. "I gave you everything," Hendery whispered, his voice breaking. "My trust. My love. My future. And you—" His throat closed around the words. Phailin laughed then. A bitter, humorless laugh. "You foreigners are all the same. Lonely. Desperate. You come here thinking you can buy love. But love cannot be bought. And men like you are easy." Easy. The word echoed in his skull like a gunshot. He wanted to scream, to rage, to demand his money back. But as she stood there, arms crossed, eyes empty, he realized the futility. It was gone. All of it. The cafe that never opened. The land that was never bought. The endless, small requests. Piece by piece, his savings had been drained into a life he would never see, never touch. And now the woman he thought was his salvation looked at him like he was nothing more than a fool. The argument raged for hours. Hendery begged, demanded, even threatened to go to the police. Phailin shrugged. "You gave me money willingly. No one forced you. What can police do? Nothing." And she was right. In Thailand, such cases rarely lead to justice. There was no contract, no proof, nothing but his broken heart and empty accounts. By dawn, the fight was over. She packed quickly, stuffing clothes into a bag while Hendery sat slumped in the corner, hollowed out. "You'll regret this," he whispered. She didn't even look at him. "Goodbye, Hendery." And then she was gone. The apartment was silent. Too silent. He stared at the empty doorway, listening for footsteps that would never return. The tea on the table had gone cold. The air smelled faintly of her perfume, already fading. 4 hours, he sat motionless, replaying every moment. The first spilled coffee. The dinners. The whispered dreams of cafes and houses. Every smile, every kiss. How much of it had been real? Was any of it real? The answer crushed him. No. It had all been performance. A script designed for men like him. Men who wanted to believe. Friends, this is the moment of devastation no one prepares for. Losing money is painful. Losing trust. It's soul-shattering. Hendery didn't just lose Bot. He lost the illusion that he was worthy of love, the fragile hope that had carried him across continents. He wandered the streets that day like a ghost. Chiang Mai's beauty mocked him, lanterns swaying gently, monks chanting at dawn, couples laughing in cafes. The paradise he had dreamed of was gone, replaced by a hell of shame and humiliation. Because betrayal doesn't just break your heart. It brands you. It whispers, "You were a fool. You should have known. You are alone again." And Hendery believed it. By the time he checked his bank accounts, the damage was clear. Tens of thousands of dollars gone. Transfers wired. Investments erased. His future, secure in the Netherlands, modest but stable, had been gutted. All for a woman who vanished with the dawn. This, fellow travelers, is the cruel truth of romance scams in Thailand. They don't just take your money. They take your dignity. They leave you hollow, doubting not just others, but yourself. Hendery's dream of retiring in paradise ended in hell. And though he didn't know it then, the hardest part wasn't losing the money. It was waking up every morning, staring at the empty space where she once lay, and asking the question that would haunt him for years. How could I have been so blind? The morning after Phailin's disappearance, Hendery sat alone in his Chiang Mai apartment, staring at the pale light seeping through the curtains. The silence was suffocating. For months, her laughter had filled these rooms. Now there was only the hum of the ceiling fan and the faint echo of his own shame. The first thing he did was check his accounts. What he saw made his chest tighten. Tens of thousands of dollars gone. Wire transfers, ATM withdrawals, investments that existed only in Phailin's imagination. Years of careful saving, money meant to secure his retirement, had been funneled into a mirage. And she was right. There was nothing he could do. Still, Hendery tried. He went to the local police, clutching a folder of receipts and bank records. The officer listened politely, then shook his head. "No crime," he said simply. "You give her money, yes? She not steal. You cannot prove scam." The words landed like stones. Without a written contract, without physical theft, there was no case. Defeated, Hendery tried contacting her. Messages went unanswered. Calls went straight to voicemail. Social media accounts, gone. She had vanished as if she never existed. That's when the weight of it all finally crushed him. Depression settled over him like a storm. He stopped eating, stopped leaving the apartment. The vibrant city outside, the temples, the markets, the festivals, now mocked him. Every couple he passed on the street twisted the knife deeper. Where once he saw beauty, now he saw betrayal. Worse than the financial loss was the humiliation. How could he have been so blind? How could he ignore the red flags? His friends had warned him, and he had brushed them off. Now he couldn't face them. He avoided the expat cafe meetups, too ashamed to admit what had happened. He drank more. Nights blurred into mornings, mornings into empty afternoons. Loneliness returned, but it was sharper now, tinged with self-loathing. He wasn't just alone. He was broken. Back in the Netherlands, his old life was gone. He had sold his business, left his apartment, and closed that chapter. He had burned his bridges in pursuit of a dream. And now, stranded in a foreign land, he had nothing but regret. Still, recovery, however fragile, began in small ways. One older expat, David, a man who had lived in Chiang Mai for over a decade, knocked on Hendery's door one evening. "You've disappeared," he said gently. "Come, let's get dinner." Over bowls of soup, David confessed his own scars. "She took me too," he admitted. "Different woman, same story. You're not alone, mate. More of us than you think." Those words were a lifeline. For the first time, Hendery realized he wasn't the only one. Slowly, he began to open up. He attended support groups, both in person and online, where other men shared similar stories. Each tale mirrored his own: the quick love, the family introductions, the small requests that snowballed into financial ruin. The shame didn't vanish, but it lessened. Because shame thrives in silence, and Hendery was no longer silent. Financially, The damage was irreversible. He tightened his budget, cut back on luxuries, and accepted that his retirement would no longer be as comfortable as planned. But emotionally, the road was longer. Trust had become a foreign concept. He flinched at kindness, doubted sincerity, and struggled to believe in affection without suspicion. Yet, in time, he began to reclaim small pieces of himself. Morning walks by the river. Reading novels in quiet cafes. Conversations with fellow expats who, like him, carried invisible scars. The scars would never fully heal. But Hendery learned to live with them. And that, perhaps, was the cruelest gift of all: survival. He had survived the scam, the betrayal, the collapse of his dream. And though he was older, poorer, and lonelier, he was also wiser. "Never again," he told himself. "Never again will I ignore the signs." But friends, if only he had listened sooner. Because by the time the lesson was learned, the price had already been paid. Friends, by now you know how Hendery's story ends. He came to Thailand searching for a second chance at life, and instead, he was pulled into a romance scam that drained his savings, shattered his trust, and left him hollow. His expat dream turned into a nightmare. But this story is not just about Hendery. It's about you. About every man who dreams of paradise, who believes love can erase loneliness, who thinks he's too smart, too cautious, too experienced to be fooled. Because scams like this don't just target wallets. They target hearts. Here are the lessons Hendery wishes he had learned sooner. 1. Love that moves too quickly is dangerous. When someone tells you, "I love you," within weeks, when they talk about marriage or forever before trust has been built, pause. Real love takes time. Scams thrive on speed. 2. Secrets disguised as intimacy are manipulation. Phailin shared vulnerabilities to hook Hendery's sympathy. But every story, her sick sister, her poor mother, was designed to trigger his instinct to protect. Ask yourself, are they sharing to connect or to control? 3. Money should never prove love. The moment you pay a bill, cover an emergency, or fund a dream project, you've crossed the line from partner to provider. Genuine love doesn't require financial proof. 4. Isolation is a weapon. Phailin distanced Hendery from his friends, convincing him that only she understood him. If your partner discourages outside opinions, ask yourself why. The people warning you might be the only ones protecting you. 5. Hope can blind you. Hendery ignored red flags because he wanted the dream more than he wanted the truth. Remember, hope is beautiful, but unchecked, it can destroy you. Psychologists say scams succeed not because victims are stupid, but because they are human. We are wired to crave love, connection, and belonging. And when someone offers all three, we want to believe, even if it costs us everything. So, if you're listening to this and planning your own move to Thailand, or if you're already here dreaming of love under the lantern-lit skies, let Hendery's story be your warning. Thailand is beautiful, yes. But behind the temples and beaches, there are traps waiting for the lonely, the hopeful, the trusting. Don't let your paradise end in hell. And if you've already been through this, if you're sitting there with an empty bank account and a broken heart, know this: you are not alone. Men across the world, men just like Hendery, have walked this road. Shame is heavy, but silence makes it heavier. Speak up. Share your story. Protect the next man from making the same mistake. Because sometimes the best gift we can give is not money, not even love, but the truth. Friends, if this story opened your eyes, don't let it end here. Share this video with anyone thinking about moving to Thailand, or anyone caught in a suspicious relationship. You might just save their future. And before you go, hit subscribe, like this video, and ring the bell, because more stories are coming. Stories that will warn, stories that will teach, stories that might just protect you from losing everything. Hendery's story is finished. But yours doesn't have to end the same way. Stay safe, fellow travelers.